Shalom YouTube, it's Fletch. Today I'd like to talk to you about 1776. Today is the 4th of July 2016. Some of you may or may not be watching this on the 4th of July by the time this video is uploaded and published, but this is the day that I'm recording it. And I wanted to share some thoughts that I had about 1776 and the true meaning of it, and part of the, if not the main reason, what actually happened. So I'd like you to imagine this, if you will. Imagine that we had a civil disobedience act that was happening somewhere in a major city. The establishment, whatever you want to call them, then decided that they were going to send in force and troops to not allow any public gatherings to take place, and also that because the people that were in the public gatherings were armed because they were afraid of the establishment, that they were armed. So we have a showdown between the establishment and the protesters. Later in this debate, or disagreement, as we shall call it at this point, because quote-unquote shots have not really been fired, so to speak, to that point, the establishment goes out and they raid, let's say, a local Walmart or a local sporting goods store, because they know that, or they, hypothesize that, these people that are revolting, protesting, are going to then go to that location and take those supplies. Now, so, they just go do it. They go and, they take people's private property and take it as if, no big deal. We have the power of the government behind us. Yes, so what? Get over it. And then because they're emboldened by being able to get away with this, the establishment then starts a campaign of going door to door and kicking in people's doors, taking their guns, taking their ammo, and if you resist or you complain about it, you're taken in custody, and just a bad situation all the way around. Then the protesters or the revolters catch on to this, that the government or the establishment, as we'll call it in this scenario, of what they're doing, trying to get all of the arms. So the protesters go out and let's say they take over some National Guard armories that they know have lots of small arms in them. And then the next thing we've got a real conflict now, because you have protesters taking over federal property. Well, one thing leads to another, and basically now we have a declaration of war. A man jumps on a motocross bike, and he's traveling through the region, yelling and telling everyone, the federales are coming, the federales are coming. Now that last part should have given away what I'm talking about here. Folks, the reason why I just explained what I did in that light was because for some of us, perhaps in the younger generations, that these stories about 1776 and what happened in the 2 years before that seem kind of fairy tale-ish, like it's not something that would really happen. But the facts, as I just laid them out to you, are pretty close to basically what happened. After the Boston Tea Party, the British Parliament passed the Intolerable Acts. And, there were four or five parts of that are not so commonly taught in modern day education. However, they don't talk about the other aspects of those Intolerable Acts and what it allowed the British troops to do. One, just as one imperfect example of the Intolerable Acts was that it closed the port, and the only tea that they could import was from, one company, and so obviously, they got to gouge them because they couldn't buy it from anyone else legally. So then, what choice does that leave the people to do? Another was the housing of British troops, or garrisoning them in people's private property, where they would come in and eat all your food, take your stuff, basically. But again, that's not talked about. And part of that was that they were going in and they were taking people's private arms and property. Um, and we know that from reading newspapers like the Charleston newspaper, where it clearly, tells us that those are the type in Boston, the Boston newspaper at the time, that those are things that happened during that era. And there are plenty of historians where we can validate, these news articles that were in the paper at the time, even though they're not taught in modern day history classes, does not invalidate them. Rather, I think it should make us as a people wonder why that's not being taught. But basically, as I laid it out to you, the the revolutionary forces were having meetings. The British were coming. They were met by overwhelming force. The British then went and took over the Charleston powder supply, which was, private property of people that store their powder there, which would be the modern day equivalent to ammunition. They just seized it and they took it. And the British General Cage began a campaign of just going door to door, illegal search and seizure. And that was what led up to immediately before the declaration of war, as the revolutionary forces were out taking over forts because they wanted to get access to the guns and ammunition, or powder in this case, to keep the British from doing it themselves. So, as I was thinking about this today, in the past I have been a law enforcement officer and a veteran, and at one point in time I really truly didn't understand the importance of the Second Amendment and what it was truly about. I was a firearms enthusiast, let's say, but without really understanding the reasoning or the purpose behind the Second Amendment, you can't truly understand the importance of it. So, folks, if the founding fathers and our citizenry were so concerned about not being disarmed, why aren't we taught this principle in modern day America? So again, then we truly need to understand what the importance of the Second Amendment is and why we need to protect it. So let's talk about need. Fletch, why do I need to know this? This doesn't really, it's not doing anything for me. Well, guys, the easiest and simplest way to put it is that if you don't understand what the purpose was and the original intent of the Second Amendment is, then it's not going to. So let's talk about some of the misconceptions about what the Second Amendment is. A popular thing going around over the last several years is that no one needs an assault weapon to go hunting. Well, first of all, they're not assault weapons. An assault weapon is a machine gun, which is a firearm where you pull the trigger one time and it continuously fires until the whole magazine of rounds is gone. So if you have a standard capacity 30-round magazine, you pull the trigger one time and it keeps shooting until all 30 rounds are gone. That is not the modern sporting rifle that many people use today, known as the AR-15, as in Armalite rifle, not assault rifle, as many people ignorantly purport. But again, its purpose was never hunting. It's not mentioned anywhere in the Constitution. It's not mentioned anywhere in the Federalist Papers or the Anti-Federalist Papers. And so that is just a bold-faced straw man argument, trying to change what the purpose of it was and to take you down a path that was never meant to go down. We'll just put it at that. Okay, what was the purpose of the Second Amendment then? The purpose was to protect the American people from a tyrannical government, point blank. And I'm sorry if some of you that makes you uncomfortable to hear that, but it's the truth. Folks, so then the purpose of the Second Amendment was the protection of the people, again, from a tyrannical government. And even in the modern era, well after the Revolutionary War era, we have many examples of atrocities that were committed against the people by a, for lack of a better term, evil regime. Um, whether we're talking about Joseph Stalin in Russia, Chairman Mao in China, or Hitler in then Germany. Um, you know, the common thing that all of those societies had in common was that they allowed themselves to be disarmed. So whether it was the regime that disarmed them before, and then because of that, when the new regime came to power, the people were disarmed, so they couldn't protect themselves from the evil that the new regime wanted to do against them. And so again, the common theme in all of the societies that have allowed themselves to be disarmed is that eventually a regime came to power and exercised their might makes right against them because the society allowed themselves to be disarmed. And our founding fathers understood that principle, and they wanted to make sure that there was never a possibility of that happening to you or to me. You can read the Federalist Papers, you can read the Anti-Federalist Papers, and clearly and plainly it talks about it over and over again. That was indeed the purpose of it. So this whole notion that you don't need a 30-round magazine, a standard capacity 30-round magazine to go hunting, has nothing to do with the Second Amendment. The next is, okay, well, the Second Amendment only applies to flintlocks and muskets because that's all they had at the time, right? Well, again, that's a silly argument to even make, so let's break it down. So at that time, the Americans already had vastly superior rifles to the British to begin with. Most of the British troops had old, I think they called them Betsy's or something like that. It was an old musket that they'd had around for quite some time. And at the time, the prevailing thought process was that the forces would line up facing each other in volley lines, and that they would all just shoot into each other's volley line, and that's the way war was conducted. So you didn't need an incredibly accurate rifle. Well, the American frontiersmen had rifled barrels in the rifles that they had. They didn't just have muskets, and they were accurate out to about 300 yards. And so the American forces already had vastly superior firepower to the British troops to begin with. So this whole idea or notion, well, that couldn't have possibly included X, Y, Z, whatever is on sinking sand to begin with. Not only that, but many of our founders of our country were in fact military men. So I mean, that's like somehow saying that General MacArthur, let's say, that somehow General MacArthur didn't know what the best weapons that were available to his troops were at the time. Are you serious? If you honestly think that, you're probably somewhat delusional. And next is the revolutionary forces, the Americans. There were already weapons that were much superior in firepower, like the Belton flintlock. The Belton flintlock could fire 20 rounds in 5 seconds with one pull of the trigger. That weaponry was already out and available. The Garandi rifle, it was basically an air rifle, had a 22-round capacity, and it could be fired, all of those rounds, within about 30 seconds or something like that. Of course, who can forget the Puckle gun? The Puckle gun was a progenitor to the Gatling gun. Where you turn the handle and it just keeps shooting? Yeah, the Gatling gun. the technology for all these things was already there and around. And so the very idea to suggest that the military men who are involved in the writing in the Second Amendment somehow didn't know about this, yeah, sorry, not buying it. Not only that, but we also have to consider this. If the Second Amendment only applies to flintlocks and muskets, then we would have to then apply that to everyone, right? So if that's the case, then letters could only be written on hemp paper with a quill. The internet certainly would not be covered because that's a modern day technological advancement. And we also certainly could not have very fast and efficiently working assault printing presses that can print thousands of newspapers or papers per minute, or even the modern day copier, right? That would not be covered, nor would satellite technology, nor would radio technology, nor would TVs, nor would CB radios, because that, just to name a few, those are all modern day inventions, modern day things that were not around at that time. So if we're going to apply that rule to the Second Amendment, then we have to apply that to everything else. Not only that, how about search and seizure laws? At that time, all they had basically were people rode horses, and some of the wealthier people had a carriage or a buckboard. Well, why do you need to have a car? Why can't you ride a horse? Not only that, but why do you need those secret compartments? Like some of you, you've got that secret compartment in the center console. What are you trying to hide? Why do you need that secret compartment there? You're obviously up to no good if you have a secret compartment. You see the folly in this line of reasoning, guys? You can't pick and choose and say on the one hand that it applies, on the other hand it doesn't. And this also goes back to what we were talking about before, the need. Where in any of the amendments that we have in our Bill of Rights do we have to express that we have a need for it? So then why do we allow other people to question us as to what is your need to have an AR-15, an AK-47? The next fallacy is that the Second Amendment only applies to the militia because it talks about in the beginning, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the protection of the people, yada yada yada. Well, was it the Sink over at Young Turks in the last couple of years, anyways, did a pretty interesting video about that. And if you are ignorant to history and you were to watch this video, you might come away from that going, wow, yeah, that applies to the militia only. Well, there's several major problems with that when we truly understand what history is. The first is the letters of marque. And we actually have historiological documents proving that President Madison signed that gave privateers the right to go out in ships well armed and take out enemy vessels, and in doing so that they would get booty from the enemy troops that they were able to take out. So that right there in and of itself completely blows away the notion that the weapons and things like that only were meant to apply to the standing army, or as it is today, but at that time would have been the militia. So the second, and we kind of talked about this earlier, is the Federalist Papers, and even in some cases the anti-federalist papers clearly show us and tell us what the thought process of the gentleman that wrote the Bill of Rights, and specifically the Second Amendment. George Mason, the co-author of the Second Amendment, is quoted as saying, "I ask, sir, what is the militia? It is the whole people. To disarm the people is the best and most effectual way to enslave them." That was in a speech to the Virginia Ratifying Convention, June 14th of 1778. And That was George Mason. Another quote from George Mason, that a well-regulated militia composed of the body of the people trained to arms is the proper, natural, and safe defense of a free state, that standing armies in time of peace should be avoided as dangerous to liberty, and that in all cases the military should be under strict subordination to and governed by the civil power. That's in the Virginia Declaration of Rights, June 12, 1776. Very clear to these gentlemen that the purpose at the time was to keep the people armed at all times. And last but not least, in the D.C. versus Heller Supreme Court decision, it clearly spells out that that was never the purpose of the intention of the Founding Fathers, that it only applied to the militia. So, folks, just as our forefathers saw the writing on the wall, so to speak, we too are at a precipice in our country on the issue of gun control. We all have to stand up together against the efforts to rewrite and or reinterpret the Second Amendment. Thomas Paine once said, "If there is to be trouble, let it be in my day, that my children may know peace." So my question to you, dear YouTube viewer, is, will we answer the call as our forefathers did, or are we just going to kick the can down the road and let someone else worry about it? But if we do that, folks, what if our forefathers would have done the same thing? Where would we be now? Where would our Bill of Rights and Constitution be? Well, you might be saying or asking yourself, well, Fletch, what can I do? I'm just Joe Sixpack or Susie Soccer Mom. I have no power in and of myself. Well, but see, that's where you would be wrong in that assumption, because we all have a voice, still at this point anyways. And so we can join, pro-Second Amendment organizations like the National Rifle Association, the National Association of Gun Owners, other, local associations like the Rocky Mountain Gun Owners Association, just as another imperfect example of the things that we can do. Next, you can write letters of correspondence to your state and national level representatives, making sure that you're affirming to them what your opinions and your beliefs on the purpose and the necessity of the Second Amendment are and what they are. Next, exercise your right of recall. If you have representatives either on the state or the national level that are voting for these anti-Second Amendment policies, start a petition drive to recall them. It's already been done in Colorado. It can, does, and will work. And next is politely correct others in conversation when you hear them, making these erroneous statements like, oh, well, the Second Amendment only applies to muskets. Oh no, that only applies to the militia. So now that you know that you can make a difference, not only in your own life, but possibly even that of your children and your grandchildren. So imagine yourself one day teaching your grandchildren how you made a difference for liberty and freedom. Now, I'd like you to just imagine yourself actually going through that process of writing a handwritten letter to one of your representatives. How do you think that would make you feel? Would it give you a sense of accomplishment that you're taking action, that you're doing something about it? Or imagine the sense of satisfaction that you'd be when you get a letter back from that representative. They usually do at least write you back, even if it is a canned response. Next, imagine yourself taking a stand for the truth when a conversation, when someone's ignorantly, espousing, half-truths or falsehoods about the Second Amendment. Imagine how much pride you'll feel knowing that you stood up for the truth and what was right, and for what the original intent of the Second Amendment was. And next, imagine that you are using your creative juices, so to speak, in ways that you can use your natural talents in unorthodox ways to spread the truth about the Second Amendment and its validity and why it's important to all of us. You know, Locke was quoted as saying, "I think, therefore I am." And, you know, personally, I just really don't agree with that. I tend to be more of a "I am, therefore I do," because just sitting around on your fourth point of contact doing nothing doesn't accomplish anything. And but the good news is that together we all can do something about it. In closing, guys, I'd just like you to consider the words of Thomas Jefferson. The tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. It is a natural manure. That's a quote that Thomas Jefferson wrote on November the 13th, 1787. And, you know, I would sure never want that to ever have to happen to our country again. And hopefully none of you out there do either. You know, and as I said before, I certainly don't in any way. And so to keep things from getting to that point, you know, what are some things that we can do today? So what I'd like you to do is to write an email to your local representatives, either on the local, you know, like state or national level, and either praise them or admonish them for their stance on the Second Amendment. Next, I'd like you to think back to a conversation of some that you had with someone about the Second Amendment, and something that they said that you now know is not correct about the Second Amendment. You know, you got to be yourself and talk to them in a way that makes sense to you, but go back to that person and say, hey, you know, we had a conversation about 2 months ago, and you mentioned something to me, and because I respect you, you know, I started researching what you said on that. You know, that's not what I found when I did my research. Here's what I found, and share the truth with them. But either way, you know, is it I think, therefore I am? That's kind of like watching YouTube videos and sitting on your butt and doing nothing. Or are you the type of person that I am, therefore I do? You're a man or woman of action, and you get out and do something about it. Because, folks, who knows, one day you could be making conversation with someone, perhaps your grandchildren, expressing your regret because you should have done something when you can. But then it occurs to you, oops, I better be quiet because the one amendment that guaranteed all the rest is no longer there. And because of that, I no longer have a right to free speech, and many, many others. Shalom.